I'm Jeremy, and I'm a product specialist at Abstract. In this video, we're going to create this overgrown riverbed material using material layering in InstaMAT Studio. In creating this material, we're going to take a look at how we can use filters to dynamically make adjustments to our layers channels, as well as how we can create our own custom brush templates that we can reuse in future projects. Well, there's a lot of exciting things to cover, so let's dive in. All right, so here we are in InstaMAT Studio. Let's go ahead and create a new project. And we're going to choose material layering and then create a project without a template. Now, the first thing I'd like to do is start off with our base material, which will provide a majority of our stones and pebbles. So if I go over to the Mat Library panel here on the left, and I go to the materials category, you can see that InstaMAT comes with a large variety of high quality procedural materials where you can tweak their settings and use them in your projects. Now, what material layering in InstaMAT Studio lets us do is make it very easy to organically blend procedural materials together so that we can create more complex and intricate materials very quickly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to search for a material up here in the search box, and I'm going to search for riverbed pebbles. And you can see we have quite a few riverbed pebbles in the library that comes with InstaMAT. Some that have more soily appearances and smaller stones, others that have more algae covered over the stones. In this case, the material that I want to use is this riverbed pebbles material here. We've got these nice, thick, rounder stones that I want to use as a basis for our overgrown riverbed material. So I'm going to bring this into our project by left-clicking and dragging the material and dropping it on our material plane here in the center. And so this is going to be the material that we're going to use as the start or the main basis for the rest of our material layering project. You can see we've got these nice scattered stones, and I think it's going to be a great start. Now I'm going to make some adjustments to my viewport here. I'm going to go to the viewport settings panel on the left and go down to render settings. And what I want to do is increase my tessellation level. I'm going to increase it up to 24. And I also want to increase the displacement. So I'm going to bump this up to somewhere around maybe about 2.5. And that's going to make it so that we can visualize our material with more depth. We can see these stones in more detail, and it's going to make it easier to visualize what our material is going to look like with some displacement. So I'll go ahead and switch back to the Mat Library panel because we're going to use it again in just a little bit. But what I want to do is tweak some of the settings and parameters of our riverbed pebbles material. So you can see we have our riverbed pebbles in our layer stack. I'll go ahead and click on that. And now we can make some adjustments to the material with its exposed dynamic parameters. So you can see we have properties for the soil, for the algae, for the water. And so in this case, what I want to do is remove the water from this material. We're going to add some water a little bit later on. So I'll go ahead and just decrease the water level. And that's looking pretty good. We can take a look at all the different pebbles and stones that are built into this really nice material that comes built into InstaMAT. The next thing that I want to do is go to this algae setting here and increase the density. You'll notice as I increase this, we can get this really nice natural looking algae effect. I'll go ahead and bring it up a little bit more. And so this is a great parameter that I'm going to want to tweak later on. So near the end of the video, what we're going to do is expose this parameter so that we'll be able to adjust this algae density parameter later on if we use our material layering project in other InstaMAT projects or in InstaMAT's integrations. So in this case, I think I'm going to dial in the density here. I don't want too much algae in this case, so I'm going to go around 30%. And so here's a cool tip. If I go ahead and hold the Command or Control key while I'm dragging, you can see we can snap to these 10% increments. So I'm going to snap to 30%, and I think that looks good for the algae on our pebbles. Now, next up, what I want to do is bring in another material. And so I want to be able to fill in the gaps of these stones a little bit with some soil. So I'm going to go over to this riverbed pebbles fine material. If I go ahead and hover over this, you can see that we have this nice soily, sandy base that this material has. I'll go ahead and left click and drag it into the center here. And this is exactly what I was going for. This material has a smoother, sandy soil look with a bunch of smaller pebbles scattered around. And I think this will really complement the larger pebbles that we have in our project so far. So I'm going to click on our Riverbed Pebbles Fine element layer and go to the Layer Element Settings panel so that we can make some adjustments to its dynamic parameters. And just like before, I'm going to remove the water level so we get this dry, soily sand. Now, right now, you can see that our material is overriding or replacing the larger pebbles, and that's because we need to control how this material layer is going to blend with the other material that we have in our layer stack. So I'm going to go to the Layer Channels panel here on the right, and you can see that this panel gives us control over all the different channels that make up our material. So if we go over to the height settings here, I can adjust the offset of the height here to control how this material blends with our larger pebble. So if I decrease the offset, you can see that it pushes down the material and we can reveal more of those larger pebbles and stones. So in this case, I'm going to choose somewhere around minus 0.65. I think that looks good. And you can see that this soil is now filling in the gaps around all the larger pebbles, which is exactly what I was going for. Now, there's a really nice effect that we can do here as well. You can see that the transition between the sandy soil and these larger stones is quite harsh. So what we can do is we can adjust this blend softness. If we increase it, you can see that we can really soften the transition between those two materials. It's a really nice effect. And in this case, we don't need that much for our softness. So I'm going to choose somewhere around, well, let's choose something like 0.07. I think that looks pretty nice. And so now that soil naturally blends with the other material in our project. So you can see in InstaMAT Studio, we were very easily able to take two separate materials and create something completely new by combining them in a material layering project in just a couple of minutes. So for the rest of this project, we're going to be adding additional layers of detail on top of this base that we have. And so what I'd like to do is take this idea of the algae growing on our stones and extend it further by adding more growth and plant life. And to do that, we're going to add another material. So I'm going to go back to the Mat Library panel, and I'm going to search for Shore Stones Wet. So I'll go ahead and again, just drag this into the center area. And what I like about this material is it has this nice, wet, grassy look. And so what's really great about the materials that are built into InstaMAT is that they have been designed so that we can use many of the components that make up these materials separately, and we can disable the parts that we don't want. So in this case, I just want this grassy, mossy ground, but I don't want these rocks. So we can do this easily by going to our Shore Stones Wet material, and let's go into the Layer Element Settings panel, and I'm just going to go to the Rocks category and just decrease the density. So we're going to remove the rocks entirely. And you can also see if I rotate the light here that we have some water from this material as well. So I'll go to the water category and just lower the water level to 0. So now we just have this marshy layer that we can use to integrate this, and we can combine and blend this with the rest of the materials in our layer stack. Now you'll notice that we have this sort of fluorescent green color from the marshy grass that we have from our Shore Stones Wet material. And it's a bit too bright and saturated compared to the color palette that we had from our other materials in the layer stack. So in this video, what we're going to do is look at a few different ways that we can control the color of our materials. And the first way is by directly choosing a color using InstaMAT's color picker widget. So I'm going to go make sure that I have my Shore Stones Wet material selected, and we're in the Layer Element Settings panel. And I'm going to go into the foliage category and also the ground category, and we're going to directly manipulate the colors for each of these different components of our material. So let's go ahead and adjust the grass color. I'm going to go ahead and click on this option here in our color picker to bring up the larger color picker panel. And we can go ahead and adjust this. So I think what I'm going to do is darken the green color a bit. In fact, I can do that very easily with the value slider here. And we can adjust the saturation and hue a little bit, but I think that's fine. I've actually got my colors saved here in the bottom. So if you want to save a color in your palette, all you have to do is left click and drag and drop it into an empty slot here, or you can override a color in the picker and you can save that and reuse it. Very handy. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and use this dark green color that I've picked from before, and I think that's going to look good. Now I also need to adjust these flowers as well. You can see these flowers are a bit bright in contrast to the other color that we picked. So again, I'll go to the flower color here and I can just dial this in. And it's really great that the materials built into InstaMAT's library give us the control to dial in the colors for each of the material's different components. I'm just going to go ahead and pick this darker mustardy green color. Then for the dead grass as well, let's go ahead and darken this too. And I think just about there, it's looking pretty good. And then finally, you can see that we have the ground that's showing through as well in this material. So let's go ahead and pick a color for that. And I'm going to choose this dark brown color as well. So I'll go ahead and hit OK. And now you can see that we've really adjusted the tone of this marshy grass to fit the color palette that we had from our other materials. More dark, a little more muted, and I think that's looking much better. Now, I don't want nearly as much of this material, so I'm going to want to adjust how it blends with the other materials in the layer stack. But the first thing I want to do is rename this because there are no longer any stones in this material. So I'm just going to double click to rename it and call it Marshy Plant Life. And so now I'll go over to the layered channels panel and we'll go back to our height settings and we can adjust some of these settings. So right now you can see as I rotate the camera here, we're getting a little bit of spikiness from this material. That's just how the height map is generated, and we need to sort of flatten this out a bit so that we can blend it a bit more easily. So what I can do is adjust the contrast. I'm just going to decrease the contrast. You can see that flattens out our material. And I think somewhere around, yeah, that's good. Minus 0.4 is pretty nice. So now I can adjust the blend offset again, and we can really decrease this. And I just want a few patches of our marshy plant life showing up in our material. So somewhere around, let's say, minus 0.28. I think that looks pretty good. So we have some patches in different spots of the material. And I think that looks pretty good. But you'll notice if we zoom in, the transition between these materials looks a bit pixelated and a bit sharp. So we can go to the blend softness and just increase this a little bit. I think 0.05 looks nice. And we get that nice natural blend between the marshy plant life and the soil that we had from our other layer. So our material is looking really nice so far, but what I'd like to do is fill in even more of these gaps between the soil and the larger pebbles and also the marshy plant life. And so we already have the foliage of the marshy plant life and the algae as well. But let's take this just a little bit further and add a little more greenery with our material. And I want to add some more high frequency details. So we have the larger frequency details of the larger stones, and we have sort of this medium frequency for the grassy plant life. But now let's add some high frequency detail as well. And in this case, I'm going to do that by bringing in a new material, and that is our moss. So I'm going to go back to the matte library panel, type in moss. And again, we have lots of different varieties of moss materials to choose from. Some have moss on the material, like this pine bark mossy. We also have some stones mixed together with some moss. But in this case, I'm going to bring in just this moss material. I find this is a great material to use in material layering to add this effect. So again, I'll go ahead and drag it in. And right away, you can see that high frequency detail that I was talking about. But we definitely need to make some adjustments to this material to make it blend a bit more easily. So back in the layer channels panel, let's go ahead and adjust the contrast. In this case, I want to make sure that I have the moss layer selected, and let's go and decrease the contrast so that we can flatten this out a bit. And I really do want to flatten this quite a bit. So let's go ahead and decrease this to somewhere around, minus 0.4, I think minus 0.43 looks good. So a nice flat material that we can then blend in with the rest of our layers. Let's go ahead and take that offset and decrease it as well. And I think somewhere around minus 0.3, I think that looks pretty nice. And so what I think really is going to sell this effect is that blend softness. So if we really increase this quite a bit, maybe somewhere around 0.2, I think that looks really nice. So you can see if I toggle this on and off using the X here next to the moss layer, you can see it looks quite bare without anything filling in these gaps. And so if I bring that back in, we now have this additional layer of moss and foliage to kind of make this feel a bit more cohesive. And so now what I'd like to do is continue to adjust this moss by adjusting its color just a little bit. And now, as I mentioned, we're going to look at multiple ways to adjust the color of our materials. And the second way that we're going to do this is with a filter. And what filters let us do is dynamically make adjustments to one of our layer's channels. These are the different channels here. We've got the height and the base color and the roughness. With filters, we can adjust one of these channels specifically. So to adjust the color of our moss, I'll make sure that the moss layer is selected, and I'm going to go to the button here, which is the Add Filter button. So I'll click that, and you can see I've got some in my favorites here. I've also got some recently used filters, but let's go ahead and pick from library. And the filter that I'm looking for in this case is the color match filter. So we can go ahead and click it here, or you can type in color in the search box and double click on color match. So you can see that the color match filter has been added to this layer, and what it's doing is it's adjusting the color of the base color channel. So you can see this is the filter here, color match, and the channel that it's affecting is the base color channel, and we can adjust the channel that it is affecting by clicking this drop down here. But in this case, because we're adjusting the color of our layer, I'm going to leave it to base color. Now it's currently set to the target mode of color, so I can go ahead and use this color picker to change the color of our moss very simply here using the color widget. But the mode that I want to use in this case is the previous layer base color. And so what this does, if I go ahead and zoom in on our moss, if I adjust this opacity slider, you can see that as I increase the opacity, the moss is going to inherit the color of the materials underneath it. So this makes it really easy to blend these materials together just by using a single slider. So I'll go ahead and zoom out a little bit here. We can take a look at that color. And so you can see as I've kind of quickly move back and forth, you can see the color being inherited by this color match filter. And it's a really nice subtle way to make the materials blend together. So let's go ahead and increase this to somewhere around 0.68. I think that looks good. And I'll go ahead and zoom in and toggle the filter on and off with the X. And you can see the difference here. This is a much more saturated green. And if I turn on the color match filter, you can see that it blends in much more naturally. So you can see how filters are really useful. We can target a specific channel on a layer and make adjustments to it. Now our material is looking great so far, and I think it already would be a great material to use in many different projects. But next up, I want to add some manual artistic details by painting in some small flowers, which continue along the theme that this riverbed is turning into a thriving environment. And so I think this is a great opportunity to show how we can create a custom flower brush template that we can save and reuse in other material layering and asset texturing projects. So the first thing we're going to do is create a new layer, and I'm going to select multi-channel brush. And so this layer allows us to customize each of the different channels of our layer individually. We can supply a color value here or an image or even an element from InstaMAT's library. And we can even define the brush mask with values, images, and elements as well. And so for this flower brush, I'm going to use one of the built-in procedural decals that ships with InstaMAT. So to adjust the brush mask here, I'm going to click this option. This brings up the resource picker, and I'm going to go to decals, and under decals, I'm going to choose ornaments, and then we have these classical ornaments that are built in. And so we have these really nice ornaments that we can use as decals, but also as brushes. And so the brush that I'm going to use here, or the decal rather, for our brush is this Flower 5 Petals. So I'll double click that, and you can see that it loads it up here. And we can now paint using that decal. If I hold Command and left click and drag, I can increase my brush size, and you can see that I can now paint this decal as a brush. Now, what's really cool about our decals that are built into InstaMAT is that they have dynamic parameters, just like materials, grunges, and noises do. So if I wanted to, if you take a look at the preview here, I can increase the count of the petals very easily. I can make this so that we have just a few, or I think actually the default of 5 was nice. And I can adjust the width of the petals. I can go down to the center ring and I can adjust the size. You can see up here. And so I can just increase that and adjust it. I can even turn on this ring option, which looks really cool. So we have a lot of customizable options here that make InstaMAT's brush and painting system very powerful. So I'll go ahead and collapse these settings here because I want to adjust the base color setting. So what I'm going to do is set the base color to a white color. So I'm going to decrease the saturation and increase the value. And I'll tell you why I'm doing that in a second, but I want to definitely make sure that the base color for our brush is going to be white. Now I want to show you what happens here if I paint with this. So if I go ahead and just click once here, I'm using a mouse in this case, but you can also use a pen tablet. I'm just going to click once to paint, and you'll see that something happens. It's going to imprint the flower into the material, and that's because of the way that our height is set up for this brush. So instead of having the height set to default, the default blending mode, I'm going to set this to add. And as soon as they do that, you can now see that our height information is now adding on top of the height information of our other layers. So I'm going to increase the height to somewhere around 2%. And what that's going to do is going to be difficult to see. Maybe if I decrease the size of the brush, for example, if I click that, it's going to add a little lip. If I go ahead and click out of here, you can see that it's going to add this little lip around the flowers, and it's going to give our flowers some dimensionality. Now you might be wondering why I set the brush to white in this case. And the reason why is because I want to show you another way that we can dynamically adjust the color information of our layers. And in this case, I'm going to use a gradient map filter. So let's go over to our brush layer here, and I'm going to add a new filter, and we'll choose pick from library, and I'll type in gradient to find the gradient map filter. So again, I'll double click it to add it as a filter. And so you can see what it's doing here. In fact, we can see this a little bit better if I go ahead and select our brush layer. I'll right click it and say solo layer output in viewport. You can see what it's doing. It's now remapping the black and white grayscale values of our brush. That's why we chose white as our color here, because now we can easily remap the dark to light values of our flowers to a different gradient. So if I click the gradient map filter, you can see we have our gradient editor. And so our dark values, or the black values, are going to be here on the left, and the lighter values all the way up to white are going to be here on the right. And so I can adjust these keys to dynamically change the color information, how these flower petals are being represented with color, and we're just remapping those values to different color keys. It's really powerful. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to remove this middle key, and I'm going to set the black values, or the darker values, to a different shade of blue. So just like before, I have some colors saved here. I'm going to click on this swatch that I have. It's more of this pastel blue color here, and I think that's going to look nice. And then for the brighter colors, I can also double click the key to bring up the larger picker. I'm going to make this more of a gray. So I still think I want this to be on the blue side. I'll go ahead and choose my swatch here. You can see this is a little bit in the blue, but it's definitely closer to gray than it is blue. And so we get this really nice transition of this blue looking flower. So I'll unsolo this layer here, and you can see how this is going to look on our material. Now this is a bit intense. These are quite big flowers in this case, so we're going to want to definitely scale down the flower brush so that as we paint, we can just scatter a bunch of different small kind of wild flowers in our material. And to make that happen, we need to adjust some of the settings for our brush. So I'll go back to the multi-channel brush layer, and I'm going to make sure that I'm on my brush properties tab here. And let's adjust some of these settings. So keep an eye on this brush preview, and I'm going to go to dynamics, and I'm going to increase the size. And what that's going to do is it's going to make it so that every time we paint a brush stroke of our flower, it's going to have a random size for our brush. So that's pretty cool. And we can adjust how this dynamics property works. So it doesn't necessarily have to be random. We can click this option here, and instead of having a random size, we can map it to the pressure, tilt, or rotation of our pen tablet. But in this case, I'm just going to choose random. I'm also going to give it a 100% random rotation. And I'm going to do the same thing for position. In fact, I want to really make sure that we have lots of scattered flower petals and flowers here. So I'm going to click on the pencil icon here, and I'm going to override the maximum value here. I'm going to type in 200 and then hit enter. And you can see that InstaMAT says, all right, you're about to change the range maximum from 100 to 200. So let's go ahead and do that. And so as you can see in our preview here, we're going to have a bunch of different scattered flowers. And I think that's going to be a nice effect. But now let's go ahead and decrease the radius. So let's go and bring this really far down. And I'm also going to increase the spacing. I think I'm going to have this all the way up at 200%. So let's decrease that radius down to pretty far. I think I'll say somewhere around 0.1 or 0.11 here. And that's going to be a nice effect. You can see if I go ahead and start painting here, we can get these really nice scattered flowers, and I can really organically kind of art direct where I want these flowers to go on my material. So now that I've customized all of my brush settings, I want to make sure that I can reuse this brush in future projects. So we can do that by creating a brush template. And to do that, we can go to our brush layer. I'm going to right click and choose Add to Library as Brush Template. And I can go ahead and give this a name. I'll call this Scattered Flowers. We can give it a category or a description. But the thing I want to call your attention to is this brush template type. So what we can do is we can choose what we'd like to save in our brush template. We can choose to do just the brush properties, the brush mask and the properties, or everything. And in this case, I'm going to choose everything and hit OK. So now if I go to the matte library panel and I go to the paintbrush category, here we go, paintbrush, and under templates, this is where I saved it. If we scroll down, you can see we now have the scattered flowers brush template, and I can now reuse this in all of my future materials and projects. So to demonstrate this, what I'm going to do is create a new multi-channel brush layer. Go ahead and zoom out. And to use my template, all I have to do is make sure that I have my brush layer selected and double click it. And so you can see our preview has been updated and all of our settings here have been added. Now, with our particular project, because of the way we're using the brush, we need to go to the Layer Channels panel and adjust the height blend mode from its default blend mode back to Add, because we're adding that height information on top. But as you can see, all of our other settings have been preserved, including our flower decal. So what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and take that gradient map that we had from the other layer and just drop it onto this new layer and just remove the old layer. I can hit delete here so that we can get rid of our big flowers. And now I can start painting these flowers across my material. Now let's go ahead and rename this layer. I'll call it flowers. And what I'm going to do is just kind of paint in different random areas of my material. Now, in this case, I'm going to paint all over the place. If we wanted to art direct this and really get specific as to where our flowers are going to go, you can certainly do so. But in this case, I'm going to show you a pretty cool technique and where we can make this a procedural effect where we can distribute randomly our flowers in different places. But right now, I'm just going to paint in sort of random patches where I want these wild flowers to grow. It's okay if they go over some of the stones. I'm kind of picking the soil and the already grown, that mossy, marshy plant life area. But that's all right. We'll go ahead and just paint these and scatter them in a kind of a natural looking fashion. And I think that's looking pretty good. I think that's looking pretty natural. Again, it's okay if we have a lot of extra flowers here because I'm going to show you how we can redistribute them in a second. So now that we've painted those flowers, I'm going to show you now what I just talked about, how we can control the distribution of these flowers by using a mask. So I'm going to click on the flowers layer and we have the add mask button here. And I'm going to find the mesh projected mask. So if it's not in your favorites, we can go to pick from library and type in projected, or just project is okay. And we'll double click that here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the mesh projected mask and I'm going to go ahead and hit S to solo the mask so I can show you what we're doing here. So what the mesh projected mask does is it projects an image onto the surface of our, mesh in this case, which is our plane, but on our material. And so anywhere that's white is going to let the flowers show through. Anywhere that's black is going to hide our flowers. Now I'm going to change the projection mode from triplanar to UV. And the reason why is because the UV coordinates of our square preview plane that we're using match up with the pixel coordinates of our material. Now I'm going to change the image that we're using as our projection. So I'll go ahead and click on the icon here. And you can see that we now have access again to all of the different elements and resources in InstaMAT's library. So I'll go down to the noises category here, and I'm going to search for Perlin. So I want to use a Perlin noise for my mask. So I'll double click that. You can see we're now projecting this Perlin noise onto the surface of our plane. And so now what we can do, once we have our mask selected, is we can make adjustments to it. And so in this case, what I'm going to do is increase the contrast. You can see as we do that, our mask starts to get sharper. So I'll set this to 1 right now, and then what I can do is adjust the balance, and this is going to control the size of the patches of our flowers. So if I increase this, remember, anywhere that's white is where our flowers are going to show through, so I can make it so that we have smaller patches of flowers or much larger patches. So I'm going to start off with something like a balance of maybe 0.6. I think that's going to be fine. And that'll give us bigger patches, and we can adjust that later. So I'll go ahead and unsolo this, and now you can see that the patches of our flowers are much more small, and they're distributed around the material, but they're not taking over the material. And so I'll go ahead and hide the mask. You can see where all of our flowers are, but then again, re-enable the mask. And that just gives us nice organic and natural distributions of those flowers. And so what I can do is I can adjust that balance. So remember, if I increase it, we're going to remove flowers, but if I decrease it, we get more flowers. So it's a nice way to be able to control how many flowers there are in this procedural way. So in this case, I think somewhere around, 0.6 was a good amount of flowers for our material. Not too distracting, but they're there as a nice supporting detail for our material. Now, here's what's really cool about this. Whenever we create a material in InstaMAT Studio's material layering project type, we're creating a procedural process, meaning that as we build out our material, we're building a reproducible recipe that lets us make an infinite amount of variations of this material. And we can see that by doing something like changing the seed. So if I change the seed here of the material, it's going to reprocess all the steps that we've done and give us a completely different variation, as you can see here. And I can do this as many times as I'd like to create infinite variations of the material that we've just created. And you'll even notice that our flowers are changing as well. And that's because we're using a procedural mask. So again, if I solo this mask by pressing S and I change the seed, you can see that the Perlin noise is changing, and therefore we're getting a different mask to show the flowers that we painted. So it's as if we're creating different clumpings and groupings of our flowers, making it so that even though we manually painted our flowers, we can still get an infinite amount of variations of how our flowers appear on our material. So again, I'll go ahead and change the seed, and you can see that we get these different groupings of where our flowers are. So this allows us to supply a manual artistic touch to our materials while also being able to generate new variations procedurally. Now, I wanted to do one last thing with our flowers, and that's show an additional way that we can adjust the color of our layers. And that's by using another filter called the HCl filter. So I'm going to go and make sure that I have my gradient map selected here under my flowers, and I'm going to choose the Add Filter button. And this time I'm going to search for HCl and double click it to add it in. The reason why I selected the gradient map is because I wanted the HCl filter to appear above the gradient map so that it has effect on the color after the gradient map has been applied. So what we can do with the HCl filter is we can easily adjust the hue, chroma, and luminosity of the base color channel of our flowers layer. So as you can see, I can click and drag the hue slider here, and I can make my flowers pink, or I can bring this over to the right and make them a bright yellow. Maybe I'll go back to that pink color, and I can adjust the chroma a bit, and the luminosity, maybe I'll darken them, or I can make them really bright if I wanted to. So this makes it really easy to adjust the colors and see what different color combinations look like. So I think I'll go ahead and do that. I think I'll make this pink, adjust the chroma a little bit, and again, the luminosity. Go ahead and zoom out and get a broader look at my material. And I think that's looking pretty good. And now what I could do is I can enable and disable the HCl filter to see, to sort of do some A/B testing here. So I can see what it looks like as blue, or I can just apply this again and see if I like this as pink. And I think I'm going to keep it as pink. So using a filter like the HCl filter is really great for experimenting with different color combinations. And so you can very easily add multiple HCl filters and see different color variations to be able to experiment with what your material looks like. And by turning them on and off, it's great to do A/B testing, as you've seen here. Now, the last thing I like to do is add a tiny bit of water to our riverbed material. And this is something we can easily do with a multi-channel layer. So I'm going to go ahead and add a new layer here. I'm going to choose multi-channel layer. Let's go ahead and call it water. And so what I can do is I can go to the height settings in the layer channels panel and just bump this up, just increase the height amount. And so as I do that, you'll notice that the layer is going to blend with the rest of the other layers as we increase it. And so I can control the level of the water in this case just by adjusting the height. Now, right now our water is looking very bright blue and very solid. So what I'm going to do is just disable the base color influence that this layer has on our material. So I'll just go ahead and remove the base color, and I'm going to take the roughness and bring this all the way down to black. And what that does is give us this nice looking water effect to our material. And again, I can dial in the amount of water just by changing the height value. And so I think to really sell this effect, not just as a water effect where we can add some puddles, but to really sell the effect that this was a waterbed that's kind of drying out, but there's still some moisture in the soil, I'm going to increase the blend softness. So as I increase this, you can see we get this really nice looking effect. If I have this around 0.08, you can see we get this moisture effect in the soil, and I can increase the height to add more or less of this. But I think somewhere around 18% looks pretty nice. And so as you can see, by adding a multi-channel layer and just disabling the base color and lowering the roughness, we can get this really nice looking water effect to complete our overgrown riverbed material. So before we finish up here, I want to show you how we can create a dynamic parameter where we can adjust the algae on our rocks and be able to adjust this in other projects and also in InstaMAT's integrations. So let's go over to the riverbed pebbles layer. We'll go to the element settings and let's scroll down to where the algae is and just right click on the density parameter. If we right click on that and choose expose as input parameter, and let's go over here to the left here, and we go to the layering project editor. You can see that under parameters, we have the algae density parameter from the riverbed pebbles material exposed here for our project. So I'm going to save my project here, create a new project by hitting the plus button. And in this case, I'm going to create an element graph and create one without a template. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take our layering project here. I can go ahead and rename this. I'll call it Overgrown Riverbed. And so if I go ahead and hover over this, you can see that our material has been created. We've got this nice preview. I'll go ahead and left click and drag and drop it into the graph. And now you can see our material has been instantiated as a node. If I right click on it here and choose preview as 3D material, we can now see our newly created procedural overgrown riverbed material. Let's go ahead and make this a little bit bigger. And so this is a fully procedural material that we've built using a material layering project. I can change the seed, for example. And you can see we get different variations of this material. And I can also do something like change the resolution. So if I go here and click the execution settings, I can change this down to 1K, for example. InstaMAT will reprocess the material, and we can see what this looks like at 1K resolution. And so I can go and click on the node here, and you can see we have our exposed parameter as well. So I can just increase the algae density, and we can very easily add algae to our rocks. So I'll go ahead and reset that down to default, and I'll go ahead and bring this back to 2K. And let's take a final look at our material here. I'll make this the center of our view here. And if I click on the panel, we can hide the panels on the left and right. We can take one final look at our Overgrown Riverbed material. Thanks for watching this video on creating an overgrown riverbed material using material layering in InstaMAT Studio. If you're interested in learning more about creating materials using InstaMAT's creative layer-based UI, check out our YouTube channel. Here we have an ever-expanding library of videos covering the ins and outs of InstaMAT. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. If you enjoyed this video, drop us a comment below and don't forget to subscribe. For the latest news about InstaMAT, please visit our website and follow us on Twitter. You can find all the links in the video description below. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next one.